I am so excited to chat with you. I can't even tell you. So everybody, this is J. Randy Taraborrelli. He has written 17 best-selling New York Times best-selling biographies, the most recent of which is Jackie. Here we have Public, Private, Secret, and we're just going to chat all the things. Also, I believe that you just sent me an article that we can chat about too. Is this going to
Yeah.
be made into a TV show?
Yes. Yeah. I'm writing a TV series that is based not only on the new Jackie book, but also on Jackie, Janet, and Lee, one of my previous Kennedy books.
Wow.
So we've optioned both books for a TV series that I think is going to be great. And I'm writing it myself, which is fantastic. I'm an executive producer, and I think it's going to be really cool.
That's so exciting. Such a big task, but I'm sure it's exciting after writing about the Kennedys for 23 years to actually see it, just keep having a life is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's such a built-in audience for the Kennedys, and especially for Jackie. Um, it was my Jackie Public Private Secret was my biggest selling book to date, and I've had a lot of successful books, and she outsold Michael Jackson, and she outsold Beyonce, and you know
Didn't it
Elizabeth.
do at number
Grace.
3?
Yeah, it debuted at number 3 on the New York Times list, which is my highest debut
Yeah.
on the New York Times list. So it's pretty cool.
It's very cool. So after writing about this family and Jackie for 23 years, do you feel like there's still anything that you don't know? Like, are there still secrets and parts of her life that you feel like you don't quite know?
That's a good question. I think that the interesting thing about biography is that as the biographer, I get to sort of cherry pick my way through a person's life, and I get to tell my version of their life. In other words, it can't possibly be every possible thing that ever happened to somebody.
Yeah.
A person's life experience is so broad, and so many things happened in the course of 64 years of Jackie's life that I couldn't write about all of it. I can only write about the parts that interest me.
Yeah.
And so I say that to say that in the other parts that didn't interest me in that moment, I'm sure that there are revelations to be had.
Right.
Obviously, there are, because I've written 4 Kennedy books prior to this one, and I still wrote an entirely new Jackie book that people really enjoyed because of all of the revelations. So since I've done Jackie before, and I did her with I did Jackie, Janet, and Lee, I did Jackie, Ethel, and Joan, I did the Kennedys after Camelot, I did the Kennedy heirs, and Jackie is a pivotal character in all of those books. Apparently there was still more because I was able to do another one.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, because you have spent so much time, talking about them, do you ever feel protective in some way? Like, are there ever secrets or things that you come across that you actually choose not to share, even though you know that people would love to hear it?
Um, wow, that's a really good question because the answer is yes. One of the things I learned as a biographer a long time ago was that just because something is true does not mean it needs to be in the book.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, my barometer was, is it true? If it's true, it goes in the book. But then as you grow up and you live life and you realize that things are not quite that simple, and that that a lot of stories need more context that I can't provide
Yeah.
if all the parties are gone, for instance, and so yeah, I'm very protective of my subjects. But you know what I'm also protective of are my readers, because I want the readers to love the subject by the time they finish the book. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to approve or love everything that the person does during the course of the story that I'm telling. You'll have your moments when you're like, oh my God, I can't believe she did that. Oh my gosh, why would she do such a thing? You know, but in the bigger picture of the life, I want you to end the book loving the subject. And if and I think I really have achieved that many times, and especially with Jackie, because so many people told me that they didn't want the book to end,
Yes.
you know, and so many people told me that they started parsing out the chapters when they realized that they were getting close to the end, and they didn't want to read more
Yeah.
than one or two chapters a night because they didn't want it to end. And that's such a great tribute, because that tells me that that this is a story that resonated and people really loved it. And I also have heard from people who didn't like Jackie all the time while they were reading the book. They thought that some of the decisions that she made they wouldn't have made, and some of the things she did that they wouldn't have done, and they wished that it could have been different. And I think that all that is important too, because really the whole point is to see yourself and your experiences in the life of another person. And if we can sort of glean from another person's life how we would handle similar situations, or how we would not handle a situation, I think that that's all sort of life affirming and important. That's one of the reasons why I write books, is to have people see themselves in the characters.
No.
So but to answer your question, yeah, I hold back if I don't really feel like it's fair, or if I feel like I don't really need this. I've held back on many of JFK's affairs, for instance, over the years, over the 20 some years of me writing about JFK. I've always just felt like, people get it.
Yeah.
You don't need every single one of them.
Yeah.
People get it. So I've kind of picked through the ones I thought really mattered,
Mhm.
and then the rest of them I've just not written about. And you'd be surprised, people write, because Kennedy people know these women. Let me tell you, like the Kennedy fans, they know. They're like, how come you didn't mention this one? How
Yeah.
come you didn't mention? And what about this one? And what about that one? And
Yeah.
I like this. How come you didn't mention? So when you're making these choices, you're taking a chance with people, because people know every little story there is to know.
Yeah.
And if they don't see it in the book, they do wonder.
Yeah. Well, I think that you did clear something up. Interesting that you say that about one of JFK's affairs, though. But, one of the most infamous ones with Marilyn Monroe, really, there was only one weekend, it sounds like. Not only because, an affair is an affair, but I was shocked by that. I feel like the common thought is that it was a very consistent thing until Bobby entered the picture, and then et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I have a lot of Marilyn Monroe background, because I wrote another book
I
called The
know, I
Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe.
loved it.
And did you?
I did,
Thank
and
you.
yes, loved it.
And then we did a mini series based on that, which starred Susan Sarandon as Marilyn Monroe's mother, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Joe DiMaggio. We did that for Lifetime. So I have a lot of Marilyn history, sort of locked into my consciousness. And yeah, it really was just one weekend with JFK. And what's interesting to me when I was writing the Marilyn book, what really struck me is she was such an unreliable narrator of her own life
Yeah.
that it has led to decades and decades of fictions about her. And the reason for that is because she told people that the affair with JFK was going on for weeks and months. And she told people that she was with Bobby. And she told people all of these stories that weren't true. And these people then told people like me.
Yeah.
And they were reliable sources. They're not like limousine drivers. These are people who are, what I'm saying? These are people who are important in her life, who she told that she was having an affair with Bobby Kennedy when she really was not.
That's so
And then a guy like me comes along and interviews somebody who was like Marilyn Monroe's closest and dearest friend, right? And this person says, "Well, Marilyn told me that, she and Bob, blah, 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 blah." And under ordinary circumstances, I would really, be inclined to believe that. But when you're dealing with someone like Marilyn, you know that part of her mental illness was that you know, she made up stories,
right.
and you couldn't take everything that she said at face value. You had to really, dig in. And when I really dug in with her and JFK, I found that it was one weekend at Bing Crosby's house. And I think it's so crazy and so ironic, that while she was with JFK at Bing Crosby's house, Jackie was like pummeling JFK with these telegrams about this doggone horse
Yeah.
that
In
he
India, right? That she was
in
given.
India.
But he
And
always listened. Like he always listened, right? Like he
he
did.
always listened, but it's so funny. Like, her main concern was, I want to get this horse, into the country, and I don't want him to have to be quarantined. And, and while Marilyn's in the other room, JFK is getting all these telegrams from Jackie about this horse. And you think to yourself, wow, that it really shows you, sort of the distance in their marriage at that point, where he's entertaining Marilyn Monroe and she's in India sending him telegrams about horses.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just thought that was a pretty incredible story when we came across those telegrams from the Kennedy Library, and I took a look at the dates, and they were the same dates that Marilyn was with JFK at Bing Crosby's house.
That's wild. Is it true then that Marilyn called and Jackie picked up the phone? Because I know that there was a lot of debate about whether that call happened, but later Jackie's therapist, who was also the therapist for Marilyn, confirmed that it was in fact her.
That's one of the most incredible stories in the book. Who would have thought that Jackie and Marilyn had the same therapist? I mean, what
It
are the
felt
chances?
wild to me. It's
Crazy.
still slightly unethical, but like I'm not a therapist, so I don't know anything. But when I read that, I was
Well,
like, dear
well,
God.
it's funny because what happened was, that these two women, Marianne Chris and Jackie, met at I think Truman Capote's house at a party, and they hit it off just as friends, and they were talking, and then Jackie, I believe, dropped Marianne off at her home, and Marianne pulled out her card and said, "Why don't you give me a call sometime?" And Jackie looked at the card and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you're a psychiatrist," and I just talked to you. Like, Jackie was like, "I don't talk to psychiatrists," right? And she said, "Don't worry about it. It's totally fine. If you ever need anything, give me a call." Well, it just so happened that Jackie was struggling in that particular moment with whether or not to go back to the White House. And Richard Nixon and Pat Nixon had asked her to come back to the White House uh, to unveil her official portrait, and she didn't want to go. And she hadn't been to the White House since the assassination, and this is like almost 10 years or earlier. In fact, I think it was 10 years. And she didn't want to go, but she felt like she needed to go because she felt like she needed to address this issue. Because anytime she had been in Washington, she would tell her driver not to even drive past the White House. She would take a detour around the White House so she didn't have to see it. And she wanted her children to not have the same fear of the White House that she had, this sort of trauma, part of her PTSD. And so she called Marianne Chris, the psychiatrist. She said, "What do you think I should do?" And Marianne Chris said, "I think you should go. I think it'll be good for you to go. I think you need to go. You need to face this once and for all. And you need to take your children, and your children should see the Oval Office, and they should see, where their dad was president. Caroline was old enough to remember this, but John wasn't old enough to remember any of it." And so Jackie, she said fine, she was going to go. She had one provision. Of course, Jackie always had a provision, right? She had one provision, which was no photographs, which is such a shame because how we would love to have the picture of Jackie touring the White House, but no picture. She told Richard Nixon no pictures, and so no pictures were taken. And then she called Marianne back and she said, "Thank you so much. It was really worthwhile. I'm so glad I went.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your advice." And then they became patient and doctor. But then Janet Auchincloss, Jackie's mom, was sort of on the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. They feared, they weren't sure, but they thought maybe because she was having memory problems. So Jackie took Marianne to Hammersmith to kind of look at Janet, but unofficially. Jackie just said, "This is a friend of mine." She didn't tell Janet it was a psychiatrist. And she just wanted her to kind of talk to her mom and just see, what do you think about this? Um, and then Janet was like, "I don't really know about this." First of all, Jackie doesn't bring friends to Hammersmith. And, I don't know what's going on here. So while Jackie and Marianne were on the beach, Janet went through Marianne's purse and she found her business card.
Or
Oh my God. It said it was a psychiatrist.
yeah.
And she said, she
Yeah.
kicked them both off the
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
Right. What a good story that is,
I love that story. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wild.
Oh, but then to get back to the Maryland call. So what
Yeah.
happened was, back in 1960, 61 or 62, Jackie was in Hyannisport and the telephone rang and woman said, "Is Jack there?" And Jackie said, "No." And she said, "Well, would you tell him that Marilyn called, right?" And Jackie was like, Marilyn Monroe?" And she said, "Yeah." And that was it. That was the extent of the call. And so for 10 years, the family wondered about this call. First of all, how did Marilyn get the phone number? And, was it really Marilyn? And Jamie Auchincloss, the brother, they said, "Well, I think it was Jamie playing the practical joke." And Jamie told me, "As much as it was like my 16-year-old self to do that,
Yeah.
I did not."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they wondered about it for 10 years until finally, when Jackie was in therapy with Marianne Chris said, "Yes, that was her. She told me she called."
Yeah.
And and
Well,
and,
I
it took,
don't think
and then
she's shared
Jackie was like,
like
"Wow."
private information a little bit with Jackie, right?
Well, Jackie, when Jackie found out that Marianne was Marilyn's psychiatrist, she almost fired her,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And 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 she said to Marianne, "How could you not have told me this?" And Marianne said, "Well, how is this relevant?" Jackie said, "How is it not relevant?" Right?
Yeah.
And Marianne said to her, "Look, I'm never going to tell anybody that you're my patient. I don't tell people who my patients are. I have, and I didn't tell you about Marilyn because I would never tell somebody else about you. So, I'm sorry that you're hurt about that, but that's my code." And that impressed Jackie.
Yeah.
Jackie was okay. I think I appreciate that. You
Yeah.
know, I think you should have told me, but I still think I appreciate it. And so that they remained patient and doctor from that point on.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have another. So you open your book, and after, like, at the end of one of the earlier chapters, you end with this quote about her stepfather, Hugh, saying about Jackie. He says, "Kiddo, you may think you know Jackie, but take it from me, nobody knows the real Jackie." That's a wild thing to think, because I know he was her stepfather, but he was a very large part of her life for a very long time. So if he's saying that, it just makes me wonder, in all your years of research, who do you think was closest to Jackie? Like, who knew her real self, if even her stepfather didn't?
That's a good question, Kate. I think this. I don't think anybody knew all of Jackie. You know, I mean, that's how we got the title of the book, was a conversation Jackie had with her former lover, Jack Warnke. And Jack Warnke, said, was asking her, Jack told me he was asking her some questions about Onassis, and he didn't understand how she basically dropped him for Onassis, because Onassis just didn't seem like the kind of guy that Jackie would be with, in Jack's opinion, Jack Warnke's opinion. Um, and he was kind of asking her a little bit of questions about it, and she stopped him and she said, "Oh, Jack, you know me. I have 3 lives: public, private, and secret." And basically what she's saying is, there's the public side of me that everybody knows about. There's the private side of me that my family and friends know about. Then there's the secret side of me that nobody knows about. And even her family and friends. And because I'll tell you, the interesting thing is that her half brother Jamie Auchincloss was, who was Janet Auchincloss's only son, was a major source for this book, and also for Jackie Janet Lee. And when those books came out, Jamie was surprised by some of the things that he found out, because even her half brother did know some of what was going on, with her. So she had a way of sort of compartmentalizing, and I think it was a defense mechanism. She always kept a little bit for herself. I think that as a public figure, she felt that people wanted so much of her that she needed to find ways to protect herself.
Yeah.
And then that sort of expanded into her personal life. And not any person knew all of Jackie. Even her mother was often surprised by some of the things that Jackie would do and say. And they would often say, you don't really know all there is to know about Jackie. And that makes her such a great character for me as a biographer, because I'm always surprised.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you think that that's why a part of why everyone is so enamored and almost obsessed with Jackie? Because we're all trying to like put the pieces together and try and figure her out, but we're never going to figure her all out. Like, I just always wonder if somebody like Jackie Kennedy could even exist today, like with social media, or if it's kind of destroyed, that. Because it's just so interesting, because I think we're so fascinated by people like Jackie because we don't know everything about her.
Well, that's a really good observation, Kate. And I think it's really true that one of the reasons why people love my book and love Jackie
Yeah.
is because she's of a time and place when there was mystery, and also when there was discretion. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, think of it. Imagine this. This blows my mind. She was the most famous woman in the world in 1963, after the assassination. In 1964, she began a romantic relationship with Jack Warnke, who
For
was
3 years.
for 3 years, and nobody knew about it.
Oh,
Now,
blows my
she's the
mind.
most famous. I mean, she's not just like some celebrity. She's the most famous. She's the most famous woman in the world who's having an affair with an architect who designed the JFK gravesite at Arlington. And they were together for 3 years, and nobody knew about it. And I asked Jack Warnke, how were you ever able to pull this off? And he said, we just were, discreet. We didn't blab it to everybody in the world. And the people that did know it were close friends and family members who would never tell anybody else. And
Wild.
wasn't until my books that people really began to understand this. And I'm like 50 years, 60
Yeah.
years late to the party. So I think that you're right, that today these kinds of secrets, I mean, if you can't have a secret like that today. If you're the most famous woman, who's the most famous woman in the world today? Maybe Taylor Swift. I mean, like, I don't know who's the most famous woman, but anytime Taylor Swift goes to a football game with that guy, it's all
I know.
over the place.
It's wild. No, everyone knows everything. Everyone's like a little Snoop these days, but you couldn't be as much in the past. I'm curious to talk about Janet for a second. I find her such a fascinating person. I think she loved her family so, so much, which I think is very evident. But I'm so amazed by her like puppeteering almost, of like very much how she directed her children's lives. That one story, well, that one scene that you really set up so nicely about how the kids in the morning would sit in the hallway, like in a row of chairs, smoking their cigarettes, waiting to be summoned by their mother into the room to talk about big news, small news, whatever decisions needed to be made that day. And Janet made the decision that it would be Jackie that JFK dated and not Lee. Like, I feel like the common, conception is that Martha and Charlie Bartlett, right, are like the people that really truly introduced them. But Janet was like working her little magic in that circle. So tell me about that. That's wild to me.
Well, first of all, the whole business of waiting in the hallway while you're being summoned for,
Please write that into the story.
it's
That scene is fantastic.
it's unbelievable. And Jamie told me that, and I was like, "You have to be kidding me!" But I want to say that, but this is what I really feel about that. For anybody who doesn't know it, basically every morning, all the children would line up in the hallway, and they would sit there, and they would be smoking their cigarettes and reading magazines
Yeah.
while waiting for an appointment to see their mom. And and the maid would come out of the room, and they would say, "Mummy will see you now." And then Jackie would stand up, and she would go in the room, they close the door, and then she'd have her private audience with the queen, right?
It's too
And it's bizarre, but you know what I think about it? How amazing is it that this woman spent that much time every single morning with her children?
Yes.
That's the thing that I took away from it. Of course it's ridiculous and it's royal but this woman made a point to at least have a half an hour every morning with every one of her kids. And there were quite a few of them. There was Jackie and Lee, her two daughters, and then there was Jamie and Janet Jr., the two children she had with Hugh. And then there was Yusha, which was Hugh's son, and there was Nina, which was Hugh's daughter. There were lots of kids, and she wanted to make sure that she spent a moment, half an hour at least with each one of them. And that's there's something about that I think is really pretty
No, I
cool.
love it. I love it.
But you're right. Jackie had met JFK, and Lee was there, and JFK liked Lee, and and Jackie was engaged to be married to somebody else,
Yeah.
and so Jackie was not her mind wasn't on JFK. She was engaged. Lee was single, but she was only like, I don't know, 17, I think. I can't remember, maybe 19. I can't remember. I think she was 19. Yeah. And and JFK was interested in her, and he was like in his early 30s. And Lee was really sort of like, wow, he's kind of interesting, and he's cool, and he's handsome, and he's rich, and Jackie was like, go for it.
Yeah.
But then when they sat down with Janet said, wait a second, you know Jackie is the one who needs to get settled, not Lee. And by settled, that means get married,
Right.
have children. And Lee has time for this. Jackie's like 23 years old. Back in that time, in the mid 50s, early 50s, this is 51. If you weren't married by the time you were like 21, people were like, well, wait a second. She's going to be an old, they called a spinster, right? And so Janet said, I think you need to be with JFK, not Lee. And Jackie was like, but I'm already engaged, to somebody else. And Janet was like, well, we'll take care of that.
Yeah. Well, because he didn't have as much money, right? You said, as they initially thought.
They thought he was really loaded. And then Janet did her research. She did her due diligence and found out that he was making it wasn't like nothing, but it was not what she wanted for her daughters. And so she said, you need to try with JFK. And Lee was like, but this was mine.
Yeah.
And they said, you can have the next one, right?
Yeah.
This one's going to be Jackie's. And that's how she ended up with JFK. Of course, once Jackie, tried, like she hadn't been trying with JFK, but once she, tried with JFK, then he became interested in her and not interested in Lee,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then
So,
there was no going back.
yeah, that was such a spicy little piece of gossip from this. And I feel like it's the first time I've ever read that. So that was new news.
It is. I think it is. I mean, I've never read it before. And what's interesting to me is I think I called that chapter "What If," because what if Janet had not done that?
hundred
I
percent.
mean, imagine that Lee might have had Jackie's entire life
That's
if
exactly what I thought in that moment. I was like, it's so crazy how one decision could alter not just one person's life, but like so many other people's around them. It's just, I'm sure Lee thought about that consistently throughout the course of her life. And even the fact that later Jackie ended up marrying Onassis when Lee was the first one to have the affair with him. It's just a wild lot of stuff going on there. Um, but something
My
else,
heart, your heart goes out to Lee in this book.
oh, I have so much empathy for her.
You
Um,
know, and
especially,
there's a line in this book that really struck me. So toward the end of the book, when somebody asks Lee, you know, is she happy? And her response to that was, I'm almost happy.
yeah,
I'm almost happy. By this time she was like in her 60s. It's like, whoa, I've never even heard that before. When
no.
I heard that comment, I'm almost happy. It's like, I'm not quite happy, but I'm not miserable. I'm just kind of almost happy. It really says a
Yeah,
lot.
that really like broke my heart. And I'm gonna butcher this, but there was another quote that she said that made me equally sad where she was talking about Jackie as being somebody special and that she was just aware that she wasn't, but Jackie was special or something along those lines. But yeah, that was sad. Really fast. So going back to Janet for a second, something that really moved me that I hadn't known that I think says a lot about Jackie and her love for her family and her kids is after Jackie had that miscarriage with Arabella and JFK did not come back for 5 days after that's her stillborn child, which like brings me to tears just to think about. She said to Jackie, like, you need to divorce him. Like, she was just over it. And to me, because you know, Janet, for so much of it, you think of her as being somebody who wants to just cherry pick these very handsome, successful, rich men for her daughters. It just felt so like human and like motherly to want to take care of her daughter in that moment and be like, get rid of this guy. He wasn't there for you.
It's such a story, and the thing is that well, Jamie, who is Janet's son, told me that Janet blamed herself for the misfortune in JFK and Jackie's marriage, for all the struggle that Jackie went through in that marriage. Janet blamed herself because Janet realized that she could have put the kibosh on the whole thing at the very beginning. You know, she she encouraged Jackie and JFK, and then when he didn't come back for Arabella, she she was beside herself with guilt. Like,
Yeah.
look, what have I done to my daughter? There is a line that it's not in this book, but I wish it was because it really struck me. She told JFK on the when Jackie and JFK were married, JFK said something uh, pejorative about his mom, Rose Kennedy. I don't know what. And Janet said to him, "You should never ever speak about your mom that way." And she said, "Let me tell you something. Here's how mothers work. From the time that Jacqueline was born until this very moment, there has not been one single second that I have not been worried about her. And I will continue to be worried about her through her entire marriage to you and beyond that. And I will worry about her until I'm in the grave dead. And even then, I'll be worried about her," Janet said.
Yeah.
And JFK was like so moved by this because his mom Rose Kennedy was very distant and very sort of not emotionally involved with the children and never hugged them, never touched them, never said I love you, never was not that kind of woman. And JFK wondered to himself, what must it be like to have a mother like this? You know, and even though Janet was, she was an intrusion in their lives, and she puppeted them, and she was not an easy mom. And it's not an excuse, but it did come out of love.
Yeah.
I mean, it did. I mean, I man, I think that there are some lines in this book from Janet that really stuck with me, where she says, I refuse to raise weak women. She
Yes.
said that at one point.
Yes.
I, I refuse to, and she said, and if those two girls had a problem with me because of that, so be it.
Yeah.
She said, but I refuse to raise weak women. And you know why? It's because I don't think this is in this book. It's in one of my other books. I have to kind of keep track of my books. But but Janet's mom was, in her view, a weak woman
Yes.
because Janet's mom, her mother, which would be Janet's grandmother, lived with them in their home, and she had an Irish brogue that Janet's father didn't approve of, and and they told everybody that this woman, Janet's grandmother, was the maid. Whenever anybody would come over, and they would see this little woman like skirting back into her bedroom because she wasn't allowed out of her room. Everybody would say, "Who's that? Who's that woman?" And Janet's mom and Janet's father would say, "Oh, that's the maid. Don't worry about her. She's the maid."
Oh my
And
God.
this really affected Janet. Young Janet was like, "How could my mother do this to my grandmother?" You
Yeah.
know, and she used to say, uh, weakness is not something that you get over a period of time. Weakness is something that you're born with, you
Yeah.
know, and you need to find a way to get rid of it so that you can be a strong woman. And she didn't want her girls to be weak, and she felt like her mom was very weak to have allowed that to happen in her home to her own mother, and she never got over it.
I don't blame her. That's so wild.
Yeah.
That's so wild. There was something though about her. Another quick thing is the butterscotch pudding story that you put in, I think 3 times, right? Like it starts off with
Wow, you really read that book. Thank you so much.
I did. But I
You
think that
know how
there's
many times the butterscotch shows up? That's really saying a
I
lot.
think that there's 3 references, like
Yes, there
when
are.
when Janet was taking care of the kids, and that was sometimes like a consolation when she would, I think, sometimes slap them, right?
Yeah.
And then later during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then
Yes.
it was so moving that when, Janet was suffering from dementia and at the very end of her life, that scene that you paint so beautifully of Jackie going into the kitchen. That's correct, right? And making her mother the butterscotch pudding. I mean, I was just like in tears because I mean, like, talk about full circle of like, you know, just taking care of each other. And that just really symbolized the care and the love I think that they felt for one another.
It just says so much, like when Janet, you're right, when Janet would like lose her mind and have, and discipline her kids, maybe slap them as she was known to do, that she had this, Jamie told me that it was called the Janet Auchincloss slap, which was the palm of one hand and then the backhand of the other, so bam, bam, right?
Yeah.
That's and she would feel so bad about it that she would make this treat for the daughters, and they would sit down and she would have this butterscotch treat, like this pudding for them. And and then during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when people thought the world was going to end,
God.
and it was such a horrible time, and JFK gave a speech to the country, and everybody was very afraid of what was going to happen. That night, the night that he gave that speech, Janet called Jackie and Lee into the kitchen of the White House in the private residence, and she made this butterscotch pudding for them, and and then years passed, and Janet had Alzheimer's, and Jackie was her primary caregiver,
Yeah.
and and Jackie really was doing everything she could think of to keep trying to help her mom recover her memories. And Jackie really didn't know how to make this. She really did.
It's
She
pretty
just
simple, right?
did the best she could for
Yeah.
Jackie, who never cooked anything ever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
She did the best she could, and how amazing is it that she did it herself? She could have had one of her maids do it, or tell the cook to go and make me some butterscotch pudding, right? But no,
Absolutely.
she did
Yeah.
it herself, and then
Yeah.
she she served it to her mom. And wow, that's just such a story. That just really means a lot to me that you read that.
Oh my gosh, it stuck with me so much. So many things I want to say about that moment, but just thinking about Janet, slapping her kiddos sometimes, or the things that we talked about with like JFK having the affairs, or you think about Onassis and, not all the great things that he did. Like, the point that I'm trying to make is something that I think you do so beautifully in your storytelling is we're all a bunch of contradictory characteristics and behaviors, and there's so many opposites that exist in all of us. And like, no, none of us is all good or all bad. And I think you do that so well, is like you show Janet in her best and her worst moments. And I think that like that's humanity. Like you show the humanity in all of the people that you talk about. So even though in some moments, like you think Onassis is like maybe not great, or JFK or Jackie or whatever, like you get to this place where you kind of love them all. That's a huge feat. Like that's amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think especially Onassis, this is a different sort of look at Onassis, because so many people have written me letters telling me how terrible they felt about Onassis when he had this nerve disease and he went to Hammersmith, and Jackie had to tape his eyes open with Band-Aids and then put sunglasses on him so that he wouldn't be seen with these Band-Aids. And he went to Hammersmith, and Janet was not his biggest fan. Janet did not want Onassis to marry Jackie because she didn't want him trading in one daughter for the other,
Yeah.
Lee for Jackie.
Yeah.
She did not encourage that because she knew that was going to come between her daughters. And Jackie went ahead and married Onassis, and Janet really had nothing good to say about Onassis until later on when he started coming to Hammersmith on during the summers, and they started having a sort of a relationship, and she was his mother-in-law,
Yeah.
and
It was sweet.
and it's such a moving thing the last time that they see each other when she gives him a rosary.
Oh my gosh. From the Pope, wasn't it? Was it or
Yeah, you want to know something that's not in the book?
huh?
I didn't put this in the book because it took us down another road. I really wanted the reader to land on the moment when Jackie gives Onassis this rosary that was blessed by the Pope. I wanted that to be the end of the story, but there's actually more to the story, and
What?
I'll tell it to you
Tell
now.
me.
The reason that rosary was blessed by the Pope was because Jackie appealed to the Pope to have Lee's marriage annulled so that Lee could marry Stas in the Catholic Church back in the early 1960s. And the reason why Onassis didn't end up with Lee was because Janet insisted that Lee marry her husband, the prince, in the Catholic Church. And the only way that could happen was that the Pope had to become involved and allow Lee's marriage to be annulled. So Jackie went to Rome and she sat with the Pope and said, I need you to annul my sister's marriage so that she will not be with this Greek mogul, so that
Yeah.
she will be with this person my mom wants her to be with. And
Oh,
the Pope gave Jackie this rosary, and then and it's because of this rosary that Lee didn't end up with Onassis, right? And
wow.
so then when Janet is given the rosary to Onassis, it's like if he knew what all the back history of the rosary was, I don't think he would have accepted it, right? But
Absolutely.
anyway, that's how she got the rosary. The rosary came from when Jackie appealed to the Pope to allow Lee to get an annulment so that Lee would leave Onassis and marry the prince in the Catholic Church.
That
That's how Onassis ended up not with Lee. So I didn't. If I explained all that in that moment, I
yeah.
think it would have taken away the sentimental value of him getting the rosary from Janet.
Thank you for
But
sharing that little
but
tidbit
I don't
though.
think I've ever told that story before now. I think this is the first time I've told it. So this is,
Wow.
yeah, this is Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I also just love that no one can say no to Jackie, not even the Pope. The Pope's like, sure, whatever you want. Here you go.
Yeah, sure, I'll do it. No worries. And not only that, I'll give you a rosary.
Exactly. And I'll bless it too. Wait, there were so many other things. I don't want to take too much of your time. Oh, question. When you think of Jackie, do you think of her as a feminist? I know that's a
Uh,
silly question, but I'm curious what you think.
I think that it's so funny. I think that she was a feminist before she married JFK.
Yes.
She wanted to work. She had a job with a newspaper. The people who went to school with her all knew that she did not want to just get married and have children. She wanted a career. She said that she wanted to write the great American novel. She didn't really feel like, she wanted she did not want to be a housewife, you
Yeah.
know. Then she married JFK, and she lost herself in that marriage. And then she had this moment, as I wrote about in the book, where they're on the beach. Lee and Jackie are on the beach in Ravello, and Jackie says, "I would never disagree with Jack on anything.
That's what I
Anything
was going to
Jack,
ask you. Yeah.
anything Jack wants, I totally agree with Jack on everything he ever says." And Lee was like, "What are you talking about? That's not how we were raised. We
Yeah.
weren't raised that way." And Jackie was like, "Well, that's how I feel. Jack is always right." Okay. Then cut to, you know, the 1970s, and she was with that Greek director, remember? That
Yes.
Greek director, and he wanted her to not take a job at Viking.
Yeah. And
And
she
he
got it.
he said, "You have to choose. It's going to either be me or this job." And Jackie said, "I choose the job." And Jackie said, "Anytime a man tells you that you have to choose between yourself and him," she says, "that's never good."
Yeah.
So she evolved into become a feminist, in the time when many women were evolving into feminism, which was in the early 1970s, when the women's movement began catching on in this country. Jackie became a working woman. She worked a double day. She had boyfriends. She I love when she was with Warren Beatty, and she was like not really, the sex was just sort of mediocre.
Yes.
And she,
Loved
and
that.
she has that great line where she says, "Well, men can only do so much anyway."
Loved that. Oh my God. Yeah, those years when she was at Doubleday and then Viking were some of my favorite chapters because I feel like you really see her settled and just in a different way. Like you feel like she's just tapped into this part of herself that wasn't for anybody else other than herself. And I think that's also when she had one of the most meaningful relationships in her life with Maurice.
This is a different picture of Maurice too, because in other tellings of Jackie and Maurice, it's always been very rosy and sort of easy, and it was more complicated than that. It was a good relationship, but they were at odds over her family. Jackie just felt like she wanted Maurice to be more supportive of Jackie's efforts to keep her mom from marrying that guy that
Yeah.
she married. I'm going to turn this light on here. It's getting dark. No, that's not good. Okay. Um, being a Morris who was somebody that Janet married, that Jackie just felt like Janet was not her right mind, and she wanted Maurice to support her in that. Maurice said, "Look, she's a grown woman. She should do what she wants to do." And Jackie said, "I think that there's something wrong with her, and I know my mother." And and Jackie then at that point she kind of kept Maurice away from her family. Maurice wasn't with Jackie when at Janet's 80th birthday party,
No.
and Maurice wasn't with Jackie at Janet's funeral, right? And it's almost like she had decided, "I'm going to keep this part of myself from Maurice," in the way that she would compartmentalize her life.
Mhm.
um and so their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was good. And and he was what she deserved, at that time. I mean, somebody who was not going to cheat on her, and somebody, who was a nice person. But I wanted to show that it had its own complexities, because I'd never read anything about their relationship in the past. And I always just felt like everybody just sort of just kind of glazed over it, that it was this like perfect idyllic situation. And no relationship is without its challenges, right?
It was interesting because there was one quote at the beginning, I think, where Lee was saying something about Jackie felt like JFK used her, or she was being used by him. And then I think we can all agree maybe that Onassis used her for, his own ego. So do you think that Maurice was maybe the one person in her life that didn't use her for anything? And maybe that love was more pure than the others in some weird way?
I think you're right about that. You know, they but they were more companions than they were lovers.
Okay.
And you know, Jackie once said to somebody that they were going to a bed and breakfast. Maurice and Jackie were going to a bed and breakfast, and somebody in her circle said, "So, will you be staying in the same room at the bed and breakfast?" And Jackie was like, "Oh no."
Like, eh.
Are you kidding? No, we don't do that. That's not us. You
Yeah.
know, and Maurice actually had his own bedroom at Jackie's home. She turned the bedroom Onassis used to sleep in into Maurice's bedroom. And as I wrote in the book, nobody knows. I mean, Jackie said it best, and I use the quote all the time. Jackie said, "No one knows what goes on in a marriage but the two people in it,"
Yeah.
right? Which is so true.
Yeah.
So we really don't know about the private moments between Jackie and Maurice, but I kind of think that they were more
Okay.
companions than they were, intimate lovers.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk really fast just about her um with Michael Jackson? That chapter blew me away. It was just so interesting, because Jackie obviously was trying to make a name for herself. I think recognized that his name, if she could get him to agree to do his memoir, it would be a big thing for her. But just so fascinating that she grew a little upset with the fact that Michael Jackson wasn't wanting to reveal many secrets about his private life, which I think we all know is the thing that sells the books, right? So that was just so interesting because she's just notoriously a very private person herself. But that was a chapter I never knew about.
Well, it's interesting because Michael Jackson was a friend of mine, and I've written a book about Michael,
Okay.
and we were friends from the time we were like 12. So we were, and he told me, I met Jackie in the 1980s at Doubleday, as I wrote in the book,
Yes.
and I thought she was amazing, and I just loved being in the same room with her. But the thing that struck me most about her was her trust, the sort of implicit trust that she had, that she was so open and so available and so accessible to you one on one, that you could have asked her anything that you wanted to ask her. And she was right there, firsthand witness to so much history. But the only problem is that you wouldn't dare do it
Yeah. You wouldn't
because
insult her. Yeah.
you didn't want to return her to any painful moment in her life, because she obviously trusted that you weren't going to do that. I mean, she just was so trusting, and I always felt like that was sort of like her secret weapon. It's sort of like how she trafficked in the world without being constantly bombarded by questions about the assassination. But it's because you just wouldn't do that to her. So anyway, Mike called me up, and he was getting ready to meet with her, and he said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! I'm going to meet Jackie Onassis, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I mean, she's great, Michael." And he said, "I'm going to ask her all the questions I've always wanted to ask her about JFK and about Bobby." And he said, "I'm even going to ask her about Marilyn Monroe, right?" And I'm like,
No,
"Michael,
you won't.
you're not going to ask her anything. Trust me. You're not going to be able to ask her any of those questions." He's, "Oh, you wait and see. I'm gonna." Right. So, so then he met with her, and he called me up a couple of days later, and I said, "How did it go?" And he said, "You were right. I couldn't ask her any of those questions. I wouldn't dare.
No.
She's nice."
Yeah.
Right. And when they worked together, Jackie told me personally, she said, "What's the good of a biography if it doesn't have secrets in it?" And coming from the most secretive woman ever, I thought that was really a profound statement. But
Yeah.
she was able to, again, compartmentalize her life in the celebrity part over here and the editor part over here. And when she put on her editor's hat, she realized that Michael Jackson needed to be more revealing,
Mhm.
and she just couldn't get him to do it, you
Yeah.
know.
It still
And
became a best-selling memoir, but wasn't very juicy, I guess.
it was more than he'd ever said before, but it wasn't. She was disappointed, you
Yeah.
know, and it took years. By the time it came out, she was so done with him, you
Yeah.
know, and then they had a big fight at the end over the paperback edition of that book.
Oh, yes, because he said no, right?
No paperback edition, and he was like, Michael told me, he said, look, when you put out a record, you don't then come out a year later with the record again,
No.
right?
Yeah.
In another fashion, that's the record. And the tradition in publishing is you put the hardcover edition out, and then 1 year later you put out the paperback edition. Michael said, no, I'm not going to let you do it. And she said, listen, you have a contract and we're going to do it. And he said to her, you'll be very sorry if you did this. And she was like, you're threatening me,
But
like,
they didn't do
I,
it.
but they didn't do it,
Oh,
so she, Jackie, I was like, you know what? Let's not even go that. Let's just not do it.
no.
And they didn't put out a paperback edition of Moonwalker till after Michael was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild. Um, it's so interesting. I was just thinking about how private Jackie was, and I had this thought because she never did any interviews. Like Diane Sawyer was trying to get her to do an interview for years, but like she never did any interviews, correct? Like it's just really interesting. It's almost like she had been used her entire life. And like at that period of her life, she was like maybe just done with it. Like she didn't want anyone else to make money off of her. She was just going to keep her little stories to herself. And it makes me think of, the little rituals she did when she was, a little older and she started throwing away and burning old letters and photos. Yeah. Why do you think she did that?
What, the letters and the photos?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I thought that was really interesting. That what we're talking about is Jack Warnicki telling me that toward the end of Jackie's life, she called him and asked him to come over to her home, and they had this ritual where she went through boxes of personal letters, and they burned them in the fireplace. And the reason for it was she felt very strongly that anything that she wrote in her own hand was in the public domain and should be and would be read by everybody. And believe me, I have read 1,000 letters by Jackie. There are thousands of letters out there by Jackie in her own handwriting. They're all in the JFK library. They're everywhere. Everywhere you look, you can't you as a biographer, that's what you do.
Yeah.
But she felt that people who responded to the letters should have their privacy protected. And so what was being burned that night were responses to her letters from Onassis, from Janet, from Jack Warnicki, from JFK. Anybody who responded to her, she just felt like those people should be protected, that it's not fair that their letters get to be in the public. It's it's one thing for mine, but not theirs.
Yeah.
And it was her final way of protecting the people in her life from being exploited. How much we would love to have letters from Onassis, dear Jackie.
I mean, I would love to read them.
I know, I want to read those. You kidding? Get on the boat.
I know, exactly. I want the scoop. I want to know. So there's so many biographies written about Jackie Kennedy. Do you ever find it like, was it ever a daunting task to think that you could find more information or find something that made this book different than the last? Was that stressful? Or did you just trust that there was so much to it that you would find something?
No, it was stressful. you
Yeah.
know I kept going with my researchers. I kept saying, look, if we can't do something totally different, then I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I was so deathly afraid with this book that people were going to pick it up and they would see certain buzzwords, Onassis, assassination, I don't know, Marilyn Monroe, and they'd be like, here we go again, same old stuff, and not even read it, because I was just afraid people were going to just think it was the same old stuff. And I felt the only way that I could prevent that from happening is to make sure it's not the
Mhm.
same old stuff. So I know all the Jackie books, obviously. I mean, I know them all. And actually, you can see them all posted right there.
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
right there. Yep.
And so I kind of know what's been written and what's not been written. And when we would get a story, like when Jamie told us about the family, the kids all lined up in the hallway, for their audience with their mom, I was like, I never heard that before.
Yeah.
Or when we found out about Lee being JFK's first choice, I was like, that's not in any book,
No.
And so I was able to just and when we did come up with a story that was in other books, I use it, you
Yeah.
know and then of course you get people who are like, how come, you get the readers who are like, how come you didn't mention that when she was at, she did this, she did, like, people know these stories so well that sometimes they wonder why they're not in the book, and the reason is because you know them so well. you know
Exactly.
I really wanted people to not read this book and just be like, oh, here we go again with these same old stories that I know so well.
Yeah.
Some things have to be in the book because she married Onassis when she married Onassis, and she did these things when she did these things.
Yeah.
But I just felt like if we can't bring something new to it, then I'm just not going to, use it. And I have to say that it was successful, because I look at my Amazon reviews on this book, and I'm really amazed that people felt like they were reading something that was fresh and new, because that was my intention,
Yeah.
and I'm so happy
Yeah.
that
You
that
nailed
happened.
it. Oh, I like devoured it. I read it twice because it was so good. Yeah.
Oh,
No,
thank you.
so thank you so much for like taking the time to chat with me. I could chat with you all night, but I'm going to let you go. I find your work just so fascinating, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the conversation, and thank you for reading my book. And
I love it.
I always know when, obviously I know when people read the book, because I do a lot of interviews. I mean, I've probably done, I don't know, 300 interviews in the last 3 months.
Oh my
You can
God.
always tell, when a person has read the book, and when you can tell when a person has it, because a person will ask a question like, so Jackie, now she was first lady, right? Like,
You're like, and we're done. Goodbye.
and we're done. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate it.
It was so nice meeting you. Thank you for your time, truly. And good luck with the series. I cannot wait to see it.
I'll keep you posted.